Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Riancho, and these are my start-sit decisions for every game. This video went a little too long for my liking. I'm going to split it up into two parts. And in part one, we're going to get the Thursday night game, the Madrid game, and then all of the early morning windows, probably a total of like 8 different games. So if your game is not listed in the timestamps below, it will be posted in part 2. And I promise you I won't make that members only. That will be available as soon as it's ready, probably in the morning. So look out for that. If you don't want to miss out, ring the notification bell. But in this video, part 1, we'll run through at least like 8 different matchups in week 11. So let's start things off with the Jets and Patriots game on Thursday night. And if we look at these matchup stats, the only really difficult one would be the New England Patriots against the running back position. It is very difficult to run against New England. Otherwise, every matchup is usually pretty good. The Jets are kind of difficult against wide receivers and tight ends, but I kind of don't care. The Pats offense is looking really good right now. The big reason why is Drake May. He's on fire at the moment, and even taking away his best deep threat, Kayshon Boutte, last week didn't stop him. He finally untapped Kyle Williams. So Drake May, I think, is a must start. That Jets matchup is top 10, and I could easily see this be a blowout. I would start him. He's playing at home, and it's a short week. I don't think that defense is scary anymore without Sauce Gardner or Quinnen Williams. So start Drake May. That's a lock. And I think after last week, you got to fire up TreVeyon Henderson. If he's active, I think he will, then he should be in the lineup. I think they have to start committing to him. His game-breaking speed is phenomenal. They can't really run up the middle, but if he gets outside, if he turns the corner and heads upfield, it can be a nightmare to tackle him. He had time to ask the coaching staff if he should score or slide. He's smart. He's really fucking fast, and he's really good. It's about time he broke out. So to someone who drafted him, been waiting for it to pop, I'm really happy that TreVeyon is now a must start. But I would like to acknowledge that Ramondre Stevenson is limited in practice this week. If he is active, that might eat into the volume, and it could be really frustrating to start a Patriots running back this season. But I don't know for sure if Ramondre will play. At the moment, I doubt he will. And for that reason, I'm definitely benching Ramondre and starting TreVeyon Henderson. But because Drake May is such a solid and safe quarterback, his number one option is Stephon Diggs these days, and Diggs is now scoring touchdowns consistently. He is now a lock in the lineup. I think the floor is guaranteed top 30, and then the upside is always, with a touchdown, capable of going well over 15, 20 points. So like Stephon Diggs, I think this is a week you want to be starting pretty much the entire Patriots offense, and he's the safest receiver to start. I would also like to start the Patriots defense. The Jets offense is terrible, and especially given the Patriots can stop the run, their only real weapon, Breece Hall, is probably not going to be a big factor. With Garrett Wilson doubtful to play, I don't see any Jets offensive playmaker that scares you. So a lock in the lineup this week. The Patriots defense is a must start, definitely ranked in the top 10. But I mentioned the difficult matchup for Breece Hall. That Patriots run defense is no joke, and I don't think Breece Hall has proven to you he's matchup proof. He has tremendous upside in good matchups. I want him in the lineup. He has great upside. But if he doesn't find the end zone, his upside's pretty capped, and typically those touchdowns don't hit. Against the Patriots, I would not expect anything to change. So no thank you with Breece Hall. If I can avoid it, I would. But based on the running back position being so slim, odds are Breece Hall is still factoring in as a solid flex play. At worst, he's a top 30 option, and his upside still offers some game-breaking ability. But the matchup is bad. I'm definitely downgrading Breece Hall. Not a top 20 locked-in start in Week 11. The Jets matchup is probably not as difficult without Sauce Gardner anymore, so wide receiver I don't think gets any downgrade here, and because Drake May is so good, I want to be starting his top receivers. Kayshon Boutte is also practicing in limited capacity so far this week, but on a short week, when they play on Thursday, the practices are all walkthroughs. It's not real practice reps, so I do not know for sure if Boutte will play, but if he's active, he's been a really reliable target for Drake May this season, so I would flex Kayshon Boutte, consider him pretty valuable. But if he doesn't play, then I would definitely upgrade Demario Douglas, who's been a little up and down, not as effective last week as I thought, but when you get some deep touchdowns, like the ones that went to Kyle Williams and TreVeyon Henderson, that just takes away so many other plays from other people. The opportunity is pretty slim, so I don't think Demario Douglas is a terrible play, but I think he is a bit reliant on Kayshon Boutte going down. If he doesn't play, then Demario Douglas is more appealing, and I also think Mac Hollins would also get an upgrade. Mac Hollins was more of a deep threat last week with 10 targets. I do consider him somewhat valuable as a depth piece, but you got to be a bit desperate. It feels kind of shaky to fully trust all of these receivers. I trust Diggs, but I think there's 2 other players in New England that are worth a flex, and those players are usually Hunter Henry and Kayshon Boutte. If Boutte's inactive, then Demario and Mac Hollins become a bit more appealing. Mac Hollins might have the higher upside, but Demario, I think, will be a more reliable target, despite last week it not working out for him. So good luck deciding between Mac Hollins and Demario Douglas, but if Boutte is active, I think he's the most valuable. I would be benching the other 2 and starting Kayshon Boutte. But right now, I don't know if he'll play, so they're all 3 in the flex conversation. And then I also don't know if Ramondre Stevenson will play either. So I think I'd rather just bench Ramondre with Terrell Jennings also factoring in. I could see a lack of touches for Ramondre Stevenson. He's very touchdown dependent this season. And right now, Terrell Jennings could vulture him. So Ramondre might fumble. I don't know if he'll start. I'd be benching Ramondre and Terrell Jennings. I'm just going to start Travion and ignore the other options. But I'm also going to ignore Austin Hooper. The Jets matchup is somewhat difficult for tight ends, and in general, Hooper just doesn't move the needle. He only vultures Hunter Henry, and it's not worth starting Austin Hooper. But the other Jets are not worth starting either. Justin Fields is not safe at all. The Patriots have had a solid defense lately, so this matchup against quarterbacks I don't think is a good one here. With no Garrett Wilson, the offense is so predictable, and Justin Fields will get tackled, not going to pick up many rushing yards. So you sometimes consider flexing him, but in this spot with no Garrett Wilson, no thank you on Justin Fields. And I don't care that Garrett Wilson is out. I'm not interested in A.D. Mitchell. Not enough volume last week to trust him whatsoever. Isaiah Davis is the handcuff to Breece Hall, but not getting any value worth starting, so definitely going to bench him, if not just leave him on the wire. And then the Patriots offense is good, so not going to start the Jets defense. That feels like a really, really bogus decision. They traded away their main playmakers. I don't trust them whatsoever. But if you're looking for long shots in this game, I think Kyle Williams may have shown he needs to be on the field more. It's possible that there is no value at all for Demario and Mac Hollins because Kyle Williams is about to pop off. He could be the missing piece in this offense. So he is really fast, had a 72-yard touchdown last week. However, otherwise did not get any other receptions, and it feels pretty crazy to start him. But he does have pretty high upside. So Kyle Williams is my Patriots long shot, and then Mason Taylor is my Jets long shot. I don't want to trust the Jets offense. I want to be benching Mason Taylor. But if you look at the stats, the Pats defense is vulnerable more so against tight ends than any other position. It's a top 10 matchup here for Mason Taylor. Maybe that does translate into some production, but I'm not considering Mason Taylor a safe play at all. So definitely bench him. And now let's move on to the Dolphins and Commanders matchup. I would like to mention that weather could be a factor in this game. By the time kickoff happens, the chance of rain is down to 15%, but the humidity is significant, 80% humidity in this matchup. You don't know exactly how teams will respond. But if anything, the Dolphins, I think, aren't going to care. The Dolphins also deal with humidity in Miami as well. So if it's going to stop anyone, it would be Washington. I think the Dolphins might be fine, but who knows? Things could be weird. If anything, both defenses are really susceptible to just about everything right now. So it is a solid upgrade. I could see a shootout on paper in Miami or Washington. If it was a typical regular game, then maybe we'd have a shootout on our hands. But because it's in Europe, you never know exactly what will happen. There could be some jet lag. It's late into the season and both teams have a bye after this. I could see them kind of willing to check out. Perhaps they're just going to stay in Europe for an extended vacation. So might be checking out early. That's a factor in this one. But otherwise, humidity generally isn't that big of a problem. So in terms of must-start players, Devon Achane is always in your lineup, definitely a top 10 running back regardless of matchup. But this Washington matchup is top 10, so definitely an upgrade for him, definitely an even safer start. The volume is just so locked in, there's no way you're benching Devon Achane. I also haven't seen a reason to be benching Jalen Waddle as of late, especially since Darren Waller went down. This is a really good matchup. The Commanders' secondary is trash right now. It ranks as the second best matchup on the season. If you look at just the last 4 games, Washington ranks as the best matchup. It's even more advantageous for receivers right now. So I could see some deep shots click for Jalen Waddle. I know the volume's going to be there. I expect high yardage. This week feels like a touchdown will be there as well. So definitely upgrade Jalen Waddle. I think he might be a top 12 play at the position versus Washington. Definitely a must start with Jalen Waddle. But shockingly, the Dolphins are actually a really bad matchup for receivers this season. Bottom 5 for Deebo Samuel this week. And we always don't consider him as safe of a start with Mariota. So not considering him a lock in the top 20, but probably a high-end flex option. The volume is pretty safe for Deebo, but the matchup suggests you might actually be worried about the Dolphins secondary. But I think they've just gotten lucky in terms of who they face. They've also gotten some bad weather at times. I don't fully fear the Dolphins secondary. Last week, Khalil Shakir and Keon Coleman did have solid games against them. So not going to fully bench Deebo Samuel, but I will consider these stats somewhat legit. If it's a bottom 5 matchup, then maybe you can't fully trust Deebo Samuel. But just a flex play, definitely some upside. And I mentioned the matchup is elite for Jalen Waddle. It's also elite for Malik Washington. Going to be ranked top 40 perhaps based on the depth. There's only 2 teams on bye though. However, the Colts pass catchers are pretty valuable. So Malik Washington might be hovering in the flex conversation, but odds are you have the depth where he's probably not worth the start. But if you're desperate, if you're in a deep format, could be a good spot here. The Commanders matchup is elite. But Zach Ertz always gets an upgrade when Terry McLaurin doesn't play, and it looks like that's going to be the case this week, so Zach Ertz will get extra volume. The matchup is also amazing against the Dolphins, a top 4 matchup here all season, so if you can trust Mariota, then I think you can upgrade Zach Ertz. I think he's a solid flex play. Not going to lock him into the lineup because they're also incorporating John Bates, and even Ben Sennett scored a touchdown last week, so tight end is a bit of a committee in Washington, and the offense just isn't as good with Mariota. So not my favorite play, but does get an upgrade on paper. The matchup suggests maybe a touchdown will be there for a Commanders tight end. Odds are it's most likely going to Ertz. But his quarterback, Mariota, always runs the ball as well, so there is a decent floor typically for Mariota. The matchup for him does rank top 8, so I think he's in the flex conversation. There's only 2 teams on bye, not many relevant quarterbacks, but given Daniels is out, you might need to fill in for him off the wire. I do think Mariota has a safe floor most weeks, regardless of matchup. In a top 10 matchup, I would consider him perhaps going to crack the top 16. I do consider him at least a super flex play. The floor should be high. But the matchup is top 5 for Tua Tagovailoa. So despite a lack of upside for him typically, there are rarely more than 1 touchdown available. He has been playing better lately, and the Dolphins do have some confidence. He played well last 2 games, and I could see it happen again. Tua gets an upgrade for sure against the bad Commanders secondary. So a top 5 matchup also puts him in the flex conversation. I think I'm going to rank Tua top 20 and perhaps even above Mariota. I did pick the Dolphins to win this game. But JCM does still factor into this backfield, and the matchup against Miami does rank top 10. So I want to be upgrading a Commanders running back this week. However, the volume split in this backfield is so hard to trust. JCM I still think is the guy they want to give the ball to the most. However, he's been vultured 3 times in the last 4 games by Chris Rodriguez, and if someone's going to catch passes against the Dolphins defense, it's usually Jeremy McNichols. So he doesn't get enough volume, but he still gets the most. He gets about 45% of this backfield's volume, and for that reason, in a good spot, he is the most likely running back to have value. But I could see Chris Rodriguez vulture him again. Rodriguez has 3 touchdowns in the last 4 games, and if he is doing anything, it's just vulturing JCM as a very annoying option in DFS. But I'm not going to start him if I don't have to. I don't consider him valuable enough. The volume just isn't there, but touchdowns have been hitting a bit consistently lately. So he is my long shot candidate. The matchup is top 10, and if JCM is not a good start, it's most likely because Rodriguez does vulture him on the goal line. But I think they have a hot hand approach. I'd rather trust JCM than Chris Rodriguez, but Rodriguez does have some value. Not going to pretend like he's irrelevant. But one of the main benefits against Miami is not producing touchdowns, it's just putting up yardage, and especially in the passing game, they do give up a lot of catches. So Jeremy McNichols is the pass catcher. I would not start him, though. The rotation is so hard to trust in Washington. I would only take a shot on JCM if my back was against the wall, but I don't think it's worth it with McNichols. I barely think it's worth it with Rodriguez. I would definitely bench him, but the backup running back in Miami right now is Jalen Wright, no longer Ollie Gordon. Jalen Wright is getting decent volume, but needs a touchdown. The matchup is good, though. It's possible he vultures A-Chain, but I doubt it. I don't think it's worth it. I would keep him on the waiver wire. But if you just want to handcuff A-Chain or just want one of those handcuffs on your bench for the sake of depth, if A-Chain went down, then Jalen Wright would be my preference in this backfield, but not the matchup where I want to trust him. Not ideal. Not my long shot candidate in this matchup. But Terry, I think, is going to be doubtful yet again, not expecting him to play, so not going to start him. I think the time for him this season is probably over. I doubt they push him back on the field. I think their season's most likely over, and if they lose this game, it's probably the nail in the coffin. I doubt we see Terry yet again, which does mean some backup receivers have to step up, and it does look like Treylon Burks is starting to get that job behind Debo. So maybe you'll consider Treylon in DFS, but I'm not going to bet on him unless I'm hitting a player projection on Underdog with Treylon Burks. I'm never considering him in fantasy at all. But an interesting player that scored a touchdown last week is Ben Sennett, a second-round pick that might get some looks as the season dwindles. Why not give him a shot? They invested in a second-rounder in Ben Sennett 2 years ago. They should find out if he can play or not. So last week he scored a touchdown. He might get some more targets this season. I still prefer Zach Ertz, but he might be more valuable as the season goes on. But if you look at these stats, the Commanders defense is a great matchup for every other offensive playmaker, so not going to trust them, don't want them in the lineup. I'd be benching Washington's defense. I'm also going to bench the Dolphins defense. They have been playing better lately, but I just do not trust them. Other than some weather maybe factoring in, I don't see any reason to trust them. Even against Mariota, I don't think they're an upgrade. I wouldn't trust the Dolphins defense. But an interesting long shot in Miami. I already mentioned Chris Rodriguez for Washington, but Greg Dulcich has been a name I've liked in the past. And although Denver never worked out for him, he has bounced around the league a couple times, and now he's landed in Miami while Darren Waller is on IR. And Waller's not coming back this week, not until after the bye at the soonest. And if you look at these stats, it is a top 6 matchup for the Dolphins tight end. So Greg Dulcich got some looks last week. I don't trust Tanner Connor or Julian Hill. Dulcich would be the guy catching passes, and we have seen value in the Dolphins tight end room. So I could see this be a good matchup where it turns into some touchdown upside here, but without it, you'll probably get screwed. Even if he gets like 5-6 targets, it probably doesn't turn into more than like 35 yards. So not going to start him. I don't think it's worth it, but he is an interesting long shot candidate in DFS. I could see this matchup turn out well for Greg Dulcich. Tight ends have played well against Washington, but not going to start him. I'd rather go with Chris Rodriguez, hoping for a touchdown as a long shot candidate with the Commanders instead of Miami. But the next game to mention is Tampa Bay going to Buffalo, and the wind actually might be a big problem in this game. The temperature is going to be 46 degrees. It will be rainy in the morning, but by the time kickoff happens, the Google forecast projects the rain to be down to just 20%. It'll probably still rain all throughout the game. Maybe it's not a huge factor, but wind will be relevant. And in this matchup, the forecast projects 19 mile per hour wind in Buffalo on Sunday. So it will have some relevance. Perhaps it does impact the play calling. Perhaps they do run it a little bit extra. But otherwise, I'm mainly just worried about some of these matchup stats. The Bills defense has been the toughest for tight ends this season, and also a really tough matchup for quarterbacks, but really easy for running backs. Not bad against wide receivers. I doubt the Bucs offense is a big downgrade this week, but maybe Kate Otten has a tough matchup. The running back position, though, does thrive against Tampa Bay. On the year, it's a top 10 matchup. The receiver position is also good. Top 14 on the season. In the last month, it's up to top 7. So I would upgrade the Buffalo receivers. And then lastly, the tight end position does have a tough time against Tampa Bay as well. It does rank as a bottom 5 matchup in the last month. But odds are this game is a shootout, so I don't really care about the matchup downgrade for Josh Allen. It didn't really impact Drake May very much last week, and I would still trust Josh Allen. The odds of a rushing touchdown and some rushing stats saving you are always pretty high, and I would trust Allen in my lineup. Definitely not going to bench Josh Allen. I'm also not going to bench Baker Mayfield. He had a tough matchup last week against the Patriots defense and didn't matter. He still put up over 20 points. I would expect more likely a shootout in this game, and I don't think Baker or Allen are guys you want to bench. So for that reason, I'm definitely starting Emeka Egbuka. I trust Egbuka to get double-digit targets at this point. Off the bye, he looked amazing, and there's no sign that Evans or Godwin are coming back anytime soon. Even Jalen McMillan not coming to the rescue for a few more weeks. If anything, Egbuka is a lock in the lineup. So that is a clear must start. The Bills are not a downgrade at all, and the Bills are an upgrade for running back. So it looks like Bucky Irving is still doubtful this week, not expecting him to play. Assuming Bucky's out, then Rashad should get a major upgrade. Last week was a bottom 5 matchup against the Patriots. This week it's top 5, and I expect a big bounce back for Rashad White. So definitely start him. I would expect a touchdown and some good yardage for him. The Bills also give up some receptions, so Rashad will be used all over the place. Definitely a must start. And then James Cook, always a must start in the lineup. The upside for him is always like 2+ touchdowns. Way too high to consider a downgrade. So James Cook, always in the lineup. And based on the trends with Dalton Kincaid, his upside games are so good, and they've been happening every other week. He has one great game, one bad game. This should be a good game. The matchup against Tampa Bay is tough, but I think we've earned some trust with Kincaid. Odds are you're starting Kincaid. The upside is too valuable. When it hits, you would regret putting him on the bench. Khalil Shakir gets a good matchup here. The Bucs, if it's good for anyone, it would be wide receivers. In the last month, it's been even better, not just top 14, but top 7 over the last month. So Khalil Shakir, still the top target at wide receiver. I would still start him, and I do consider him relatively bust-proof in this Bills offense. But last week, some elite upside was there for Tez Johnson in this Buccaneers offense. He scored 2 touchdowns last week, and based off of that production, you definitely trust him in the lineup. If you are looking for a flex play, I might consider ranking him as just a straight start. The Buccaneers wide receiver core has always been valuable in fantasy football. So some elite upside, the touchdown kind of feels like a decent bet, and I would definitely consider him a solid flex play. I'm going to be ranking Tez Johnson at worst in the top 30 wide receivers this week. Elite upside in most likely a shootout. But if not for a shootout, I would probably be benching Cade Otton. Based on the matchup stats, tight ends against Buffalo are not players you want in your lineup. So going to downgrade him, but he's been really reliable. And based on a lack of competition, I would still expect solid volume. He's been good from a yardage standpoint, but touchdowns have kind of evaded him. So just a floor play this week, but still in the flex conversation. Cade Otton has been a good backup tight end you picked up off the waiver wire. But last week, Keon Coleman finally woke up. It's been a while for him, so there was some upside. He was better than Shakir in fantasy last week, but I still don't really trust him. The matchup is top 10 in the last month, though, against Tampa, so an upgrade yet again. But to tell me you're locking in Keon Coleman with confidence would be very risky. I don't think it's smart to lock in Keon Coleman, but to pretend like he doesn't have upside in the Bills offense would also be naive. So high risk, high reward, definitely in the flex conversation, but a tier below Tez Johnson and Cade Otton. I'd much rather start those other Bucs receivers than Keon Coleman, the third target in his offense. But players I'm benching definitely include Bucky Irving. I don't expect him to start, so as long as he remains out, you can't trust Bucky Irving. He's not even going to play. Chris Godwin has also been riddled with injuries this year, so not going to start him, not assuming he starts. And then Tez Johnson is clearly the player you want above Sterling Shepard. Not going to start Sterling Shepard. The volume just is not high enough, and even if it's there for him, it's never down the field. It's just like check downs, and without a touchdown, you will not crack 8+ points. Dawson Knox does have some value in this offense. They are incorporating multiple tight ends lately, but I only trust Kincaid. I do not trust Knox. It's way too risky to bet on him. And then Ray Davis is just not getting enough volume. Like an average of 3 touches per game is pretty useless. He's just a handcuff. If James Cook went down, he'd be a great start, but until that happens, he is no value at all. And same with Josh Palmer. He does have some upside, but it almost never happens. To predict the Bills receiving core accurately beyond Shakir is a crapshoot. So not going to trust Josh Palmer, that's for sure. And despite some odd weather, I don't care. I'm not starting the defenses. This game is probably like a 38-35 final score. So not going to start the Bills. Their defense has been pretty shitty this season. So against Baker this year, no chance I'm starting them. And against Josh Allen, I'm not going to press my luck with the Bucs defense. Last week, I told you they were still probably worth starting just to hold on to, and I still believe that. Their playoff schedule is elite, but this schedule right now against teams like the Patriots and Buffalo, not excited to face off against those teams at all. Some elite offenses can definitely burn you, and last week, Tampa gave me -1 in my lineup. So not considering them safe at all. I'll avoid them if I can. I want to stash them for the fantasy playoffs because their schedule in division is really good. They get the Panthers, Saints, and Falcons in the fantasy playoffs. But at the moment against Buffalo, don't feel confident enough to start them. But some long shots in this game would be Sean Tucker, the backup running back in Tampa Bay, because Bucky, I don't expect to suit up. And this Bills matchup, if it's good for anyone, it's good for running back. So maybe he vultures a touchdown. Maybe he has a house call. It feels too cute to bet on, though. He's just a handcuff if Rashad were to go down. So not going to start him, not going to get cute with Sean Tucker, and also not going to press my luck with Ty Johnson. But where the Bucs are vulnerable against the running back position is if you can catch passes. And beyond James Cook, Ty Johnson is catching more receptions, getting more targets than Ray Davis. So I would consider Ty Johnson a little more tempting in terms of upside than Ray in this matchup. But not going to start him. I don't think it's worth it. I trust the main starters in Buffalo. I do not trust the third string running back whatsoever. So that is it for this matchup. Let's move on to the next one, where in Atlanta, we might get a very low scoring game in division. Last time we saw these two teams play, it was in Carolina, and the Panthers won 30-0. That one was a shocker. So perhaps you trust the Panthers defense again. If you look at their stats, they're actually a tough matchup for most positions. Only tight end gets a good spot here. The Panthers give up top 8 numbers to opposing tight ends. But in the last month, it's gotten more difficult. It ranks number 20. So Kyle Pitts probably not the safest upgrade. And then if you look more closely against running backs, the Panthers are starting to be a pretty good matchup in the last month. They are up to number 9 in terms of upgrades. They do rank top 10 in the last 4 games. But on the season, the Panthers' run defense is pretty good, ranks 18th, so below average. A neutral matchup for someone like Bijan and Tyler Algier. But the Falcons are a very tough matchup, especially for opposing tight ends, so definitely not going to trust Jatavion Sanders against Atlanta. I would also downgrade Bryce Young. He's always a tough start, so not going to start him in a bottom 6 matchup. And then the matchup's bottom 7 for receivers against the Falcons as well. So Tet just a flex play most likely, not getting an upgrade. The only upgrade would be the Falcons' run defense being pretty terrible. But last week, that game against Jonathan Taylor definitely skewed the numbers. A 50-point game, probably not going to repeat for Rico Dowdle. But if there was a player in Carolina that I do trust in my lineup, it would be Rico Dowdle. So let's hope for the best. Let's assume that this matchup continues to be a good one. Going into that Germany game against the Colts, they were pretty vulnerable in the last month. They have been looking pretty bad in the run defense. So Rico Dowdle, I do think is a good start. I would upgrade to him for sure. But otherwise, the only players I'm trusting in my lineup are Atlanta Falcons. I still want to be starting Bijan Robinson. I don't know what happened last week, why he was vultured twice by Tyler Algier. Algier was playing well. It's happened before, but it is pretty frustrating that for the past 3 weeks, Bijan is only getting you about 10 fantasy points on average. That is very frustrating. The floor is fine. You can't really complain about double-digit points as a floor, but when you drafted Bijan top 3, for him to be this mediocre is annoying. So can't bench him, have to keep starting him. The Panthers matchup is good right now, so I'm not going to fade him. I'm definitely still starting Bijan, but I am frustrated with the last 3 games. Drake London, I think, is a must start regardless of the downgrade. Against JC Horn, I just don't care. London has looked matchup proof at times, and I will keep him in the top 10. Not going to rank him as a player to bench. So London, based on volume, is really the only receiver getting any volume in this passing game. London is a lock, but I do not trust Bryce Young. I do not trust the Panthers offense. Other than Rico Dowdle, there is really no player that scares you whatsoever. So the Falcons defense as a whole has been pretty good this season. The only upgrade they allow is against running backs right now. So I don't think Rico will completely torch you in fantasy if you start the Falcons. So I consider them a top 10 matchup this week. I think they will win. Their defense should step up. And I do not fear the Panthers offense. Even the Saints defense was a solid start against Bryce Young. Even if the Panthers win, the score will be pretty low. So I don't see their offense burning you. The Falcons defense, I think, is a safe start. But Tet McMillan always gets solid volume. So even in a bad matchup against Atlanta, he is still not downgraded enough to bench. I would still probably flex Tet based on volume. You still probably get like 7 or 8 points from McMillan in half PPR. In full PPR, he's still probably a top 30 play. But Tyler Algier has factored in consistently to this offense. He doesn't get an avalanche of volume, but even if it's just 9 or 12 carries, he can do a lot with it. He does get a lot of volume on the goal line specifically. So they use him. It's a top 10 matchup the last month, an average one on the season. There was a time when I considered him just as good as Zach Charbonnet, and I don't consider that a terrible comp even to this day. I think Charbonnet has a little more value, a little more consistency in terms of volume, but Algier isn't far behind him, and a touchdown isn't really a bad bet to make with him either. So Algier in the flex conversation for sure, but with this Falcons matchup being pretty vulnerable to running backs, I do think Chuba Hubbard also factors in as well. I do not trust Chuba anywhere near as much as Rico Dowdle, but if I'm willing to start the backup Falcons running back at flex, I think in a good matchup for Chuba, the backup Panthers running back also does have some flex value, but probably going to bench him. The volume doesn't feel safe enough to bet on, but in division, you never know what'll happen. They might rely on some random names, but Chuba gets a good matchup. I do envision him having high efficiency when he does get the ball. But the Kyle Pitts matchup is top 10, so maybe you're willing to trust him. And if you tell me he gives you like 45 yards, 50 yards, I wouldn't be that surprised, but odds are it doesn't move the needle. Odds are you don't get a touchdown that is so valuable at this position. It's probably not worth your time with Kyle Pitts, but I will rank him most likely top 20. But this quarterback matchup is not good, and Michael Penix has looked really inaccurate, especially when he targets anyone other than Drake London. The ball is just not really connecting whatsoever. Mooney only caught 1 of his 8 targets last week. So Penix is a big reason why he's really inaccurate at times, and I just don't see much upside. He has had some value, but in this divisional game, I don't see a high score. I think they lean on the run. I would bench Michael Penix. I'm also benching Bryce Young. He's never in my lineup. He's been terrible this season for fantasy. And against the Falcons, it's not an upgrade, so I don't see why you would talk yourself into it. Xavier Legette, very hard to trust. This Panthers passing game is just so unpredictable. And although he has had some touchdown production, he has one good game, it's just not consistent enough. I'm not going to trust Xavier Legette. I'd rather go Legette, though, than Jalen Coker, but definitely benching him as well. If it's not Tet McMillan, I don't trust Coker or Legette. I also do not trust Jatavion Sanders this week. Last week he had about 5 points, but that's kind of been his ceiling this season. And this Falcons matchup is the second toughest on the year. So no upgrade whatsoever. I do not want Jatavion Sanders in my lineup. But it pains me to say this, but Darnell Mooney is now just a long shot. There is no way you can look at Mooney's game log and tell me he is a safe flex play in any scenario. So to pretend like he doesn't have upside last week with 8 targets, there's a lot of potential that just does not hit. One of these days, he will come down with those targets, but I'm not going to bet on it. Only in DFS would I even consider it. And then Carolina did shut down Atlanta's offense completely last time these two teams played. They held them to 0 points, and it was their best fantasy game all year. In my scoring format, they put up 20 fantasy points against Atlanta back earlier in the season. So could be similar. They're my long shot candidate. I don't think you really want to be rostering the Panthers defense too often, but defense is a weekly position to stream, and they do have some upside. It's not like the Panthers don't have any value against a mediocre quarterback and offense like Atlanta, but I could see Bijan and Drake London go off. It's possible they totally burn you. So high risk, high reward, just a long shot. I'd probably just leave them on the waiver wire. They don't feel totally worth rostering at all. So just a depth piece, but odds are I'll bench him. But moving on to the Vikings hosting Chicago, I can't quite tell if this game is going to be a lot of defense or a lot of offense, because the Bears defense is bad. They've been really bad all year, and although they've gotten better since the bye, the only category to actually be a downgrade would be running back. On the season, the Bears run defense is a top 12 matchup for those running backs. However, in the last month since the bye week, Chicago ranks as the 5th toughest matchup in fantasy for running backs. So you might consider based on the number, Aaron Jones and Jordan Mason to get an upgrade, but in my opinion, it's a big downgrade. I would not trust Jordan Mason or Aaron Jones. But otherwise, the Bears defense is pretty trash. Even Jackson Dart without Cam Scatterbo put up some good numbers in the snow. So I could see the Bears defense totally shit the bed in the dome in Minnesota. It's possible, but to trust JJ McCarthy and that offense is kind of hard as well. So not quite sure which side is going to give. And then the Vikings defense this year at times, Minnesota can be difficult, but it has gotten very easy in the last month. That makes me think this game is more likely a shootout. If you look at the Vikings quarterback defense in the last month, they're actually better than top 15. They rank top 9. So Caleb Williams, I do think, gets an upgrade. The running backs, though, get a slight downgrade against the Vikings, a bottom 12 run defense matchup. And then against wide receiver, it's also bottom 10. However, if you look at the last month since the bye week for Minnesota, their secondary has been really bad. They're allowing top 5 numbers against the wide receiver position. So I actually think this is an upgrade for guys like Rome Odunze and DJ Moore. The Bears receivers are actually getting a top 5 matchup if you only look at the last 4 games for Minnesota. But the matchup is also good for tight end. So if I was projecting this game, I would assume it's more likely a shootout. I don't see much defense other than Chicago against the run really showing up. And I picked the Bears to win, so betting on Ben Johnson is what I'm going to do. I'm going to trust that this matchup is still top 10 and that these last 4 games for Minnesota do point to this being a big upgrade for Caleb Williams. I would be starting Caleb Williams, especially because their secondary is so bad. If it's top 5 numbers for Rome Odunze and DJ Moore, I want both in the lineup. The last 2 games have been really odd for these two. 2 weeks ago, Rome put up a bagel. Last week, he played lights out. And then 2 weeks ago, when Rome had a bagel, DJ Moore played amazing. And then last week, DJ Moore got the bagel. It's been flipping between the two, so very frustrating. But against Minnesota, I think I just want to start both. I think I just want to trust that Caleb will play well and DJ Moore will step up. He's had some good stats against the Vikings in his Bears career. And Rome Odunze, I still think, is probably the safer receiver to start in Chicago. So I want both of them in the lineup. I'm going to trust both of them, but I'm reluctantly still going to trust Justin Jefferson, especially in home games. Jefferson has demolished the Chicago Bears historically. He plays bad against them on the road, and in week 1, he wasn't like elite against them, but he still played well with JJ McCarthy. And on the season, this Bears secondary is a top 6 matchup. So I'll stick with Jefferson. I don't feel great about it, but based on name value, I think you just have to keep him in the lineup. And then this matchup, if it's difficult for anyone against the Vikings, it would be difficult for DeAndre Swift. They rank 20th against running backs in fantasy, so not the toughest spot you could get, definitely not the easiest. So I don't think Swift is like a lock for elite upside. His injury, I think, is still factoring in, but last week he returned to the lineup. I assume he'll play yet again, and he was much more involved than Kyle Monangai. He got vultured on the goal line, but still had the most fantasy points between the two. So I would still trust DeAndre Swift. This Bears offense is just so prolific this year. I trust Ben Johnson, and he wants to run the ball. He uses Swift quite a lot. So those 5 players I would start, but I would consider Colston Loveland. I liked his upside a lot entering the year, and this matchup against Minnesota is top 10. So he's factoring in a lot more the last 2 games. He's well overtaken Cole Kmet, who has been pretty banged up the last few weeks. Loveland has been taking advantage of that opportunity, and I think he's clearly the starting tight end rest of the season. They drafted him 10th overall. You know they're committed to him looking good. So he was really young entering the season. I could see that as a reason why he's had a slow start, but now that they've started to get him going, I do see him as the X factor in this offense. I do think Loveland in a good matchup has some upside. I would consider him a high flex option at tight end, an interesting pickup off the wire if you can still get him. I would grab him on the bench. I think he has some really high upside as the season goes on. I could see some elite league-winning value with Colston Loveland rest of season. But Kyle Monangai, I still think, is in the flex conversation. This Vikings matchup isn't easy, but Monangai is not going away. And while he is questionable, a little bit banged up after a lot of usage the last 2 games, I assume he'll play. I think he'll be fine. I'm not too worried about Kyle Monangai, but definitely not the safest investment. Definitely just like a handcuff more than like a must start, but I do think he is not going away and he will have some flex value. I don't think he's the safest start, but he might crack the top 30. Given two teams are on bye, you might have to replace someone like Jonathan Taylor. But JJ McCarthy gets a good matchup here. The Chicago Bears defense is a top 5 matchup this season, so definitely an upgrade. I like his mobility. I think he could offer you like 30, 40 rushing yards this week and maybe a rushing touchdown, but in the passing game, it's just not that good. Very rarely is he going over 200 yards, and if he does, it kind of feels lucky if that happens. So I don't really trust him from that standpoint, but based on the matchup stats, I would consider him a safer super flex option. Definitely not top 10, but in a 2-quarterback league, I could understand arguing that McCarthy should be in the lineup as the number 2 quarterback on your team. But Jordan Addison, definitely not as safe with McCarthy these days. The matchup is good against Chicago, but he's never going to be more than a flex play with McCarthy at the quarterback position. So not as much upside without Wentz. I just don't see the touchdowns hitting, but he still is a burner, still can put up high yardage on limited volume. Addison, still very talented, but not as good in fantasy, not as valuable as Justin Jefferson. TJ Hawkinson gets a good matchup this week. The Chicago Bears defense is a solid upgrade, not a downgrade at all. And Hawkinson could score a touchdown. I could see a bit of a rivalry in division lead to him playing well. So Hawkinson going to be in the low-end tight end streaming discussion, but not a safe start at all. However, because it's against McCarthy, I could talk myself into the Bears being somewhat interesting. But whenever I put a player in this spot, in this like little corner in the flex section, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you that they're an upgrade. I kind of don't think they're worth a start at all. They're way too risky. They've played like shit at times, and if they burn you, it wouldn't shock me whatsoever. So I don't want to do it, but against McCarthy, they did have a pick 6 back in week 1 against him. It could happen again. McCarthy is a pretty safe bet to throw at least 1 interception and less than 200 yards. So could be worse than starting Chicago, but feels very risky. I'd probably just avoid it. Overall, like I said, odds are this matchup is more of a shootout. So I'm also going to be benching the Vikings defense for sure. The Bears offense looks like no joke this season, so not going to trust them. They've been much worse in the last month. They've been nowhere near as difficult of a matchup on defense. So not going to trust the Vikings. They don't feel safe at all. And then I mentioned this Bears run defense is actually really tough in the last month. It's down to bottom 5 stats in fantasy. So they're getting much more difficult. They started off as such a good matchup early in the season. That's why they still rank top 12, but they're moving down pretty rapidly. And I don't think it's an upgrade at all for Aaron Jones or Jordan Mason. But if I had to make a preference, it would be Aaron Jones over Mason. If you look at the history of Aaron Jones against Chicago, he fucking owns them. He always plays well against Chicago. But in week 1, the only reason he played well was because he contributed in the passing game. He had a long receiving touchdown. Without it, he would have burned you. So at this stage of his career, I don't trust the volume to be that high. Aaron Jones at the age of 30 is just not that safe of a bet. And he's probably going to be limited in practice all week long. So not dying to trust him. The Bears matchup is looking very tough lately. So no thank you with Aaron Jones. And also no thank you with Jordan Mason. I think Aaron Jones is more valuable than Jordan Mason, and in a tough spot. Not going to trust Mason whatsoever. But I don't think I'm going to trust Olamide Zaccheaus. I don't see the value there. If I'm going to be betting on a random player in Chicago that catches passes, it's definitely Colston Loveland, and I just don't think Zaccheaus is appealing enough. But on occasion, he does play well. He's an interesting long shot candidate, but probably not worth picking him up off the wire. And same with Cole Kmet. Kmet has been banged up last few weeks, and it looks like he's clearly losing his job to Colston Loveland. So no thank you with Cole Kmet, but my favorite long shot in Chicago is Luther Burden. And last week he did contribute a little bit more, but it looks pretty random to trust a third receiver in Chicago. There's been a bagel for Rome and DJ Moore in each of the last 2 weeks, and odds are the bagel will pivot to Luther Burden or Zaccheaus. So no thanks with him, but there is some upside. I do think his role will expand as the year goes on, but until next year, until they move off of DJ Moore, I can't envision ever starting Burden in the lineup. But last week, Jalen Naylor should have been in your lineup. I just can never envision you feeling confident enough to start him. He stole all the upside that should have gone to someone like Addison, or at least Justin Jefferson. He had 5 targets, 5 catches, 100+ yards and a touchdown. Jalen Nailor played fantastic. So maybe he actually has good chemistry with McCarthy, but I'm not going to trust him. Definitely not adding him off the wire. I think chasing those points is fool's gold. So no thank you, but definitely want to acknowledge him as a long shot candidate. There is some upside that he proved last week. In this Vikings matchup, it's in Minnesota. The game is indoors. There is no weather to worry about. In this Jaguars-Chargers game, I think Justin Herbert might be the #1 quarterback on the week. I'm 100% endorsing and starting Justin Herbert. If you had him, you were already probably starting him. But this Jaguars matchup is top 3. They just gave up 29 fantasy points to Davis Mills, and they have been reeling overall in the last 4 games. The Jags do rank as the best quarterback matchup overall. So Justin Herbert going to play lights out, especially if Oronde Gadsden plays. Gadsden, I also think, is a must start. The Jaguars are the second best matchup for opposing tight ends, so 100% start Oronde Gadsden, but he is actually questionable at the moment. Left last week's game with a knee injury and quad contusion. I'm not quite sure if he will suit up, but if he does, the matchup is elite. So if Gadsden plays, I would definitely start him, but if he doesn't, that just makes Ladd McConkey that much safer. Ladd gets a good matchup as well. The Jags give up top 11 numbers to receiver. So Ladd is definitely the receiver you want to start in LA. He's the safest bet for targets. And that receiving core is a bit random at times, but Ladd is the safest money in the bank floor play you can find in the Chargers offense. So definitely start him. I also think Kimani Vidal is probably in your starting lineup. He's had too many good games and showed up too consistently to fade. Last week was a tough matchup against Pittsburgh, and he played pretty well. I would assume there's enough touchdowns and points for the Chargers offense as a whole for Kimani Vidal to be worth your while in fantasy. So I would start him. I'm definitely starting him, but I think ETN is probably a safer play. ETN gets a solid matchup here, pretty average against the Chargers. They've been league average all season, pretty up and down, but last week Jaylen Warren had pretty good production against the Chargers. So I trust ETN with the injuries at receiver. ETN is kind of the heart of the offense, definitely too much volume to fade. However, I don't trust Trevor Lawrence or that Jaguars offense right now, especially if Brian Thomas doesn't play. I think the Chargers are playing well enough on defense where you should start them. They're a pretty bad downgrade for every position except running back this year. 29th against quarterbacks, 31st against receivers, 26th against tight ends. I don't see much upside for the Jags offense. So unless it's a shootout and garbage time does burn you, then maybe the Chargers are a bad start. But I think based off of this matchup, I like it a lot. With no Brian Thomas Jr., most likely, I think the Chargers have earned your trust. They really shut down the Steelers' offense last week, and I don't think the Steelers are that much different, that much better than the Jags offense. So I would start the Chargers. I think they've earned some trust, but this matchup for Quentin Johnston looks really good right now, and because of the injury to Oronde Gadsden, I do think QJ is a little more interesting. The volume will definitely be increased if Oronde Gadsden doesn't play. So Quentin Johnston is a solid flex play, and although he has had some rough games at times, like a bagel several weeks ago, I am seeing less consistency with Keenan Allen right now. I don't think Keenan is that safe. Last 3 games, Keenan has about 5 targets per game, and that is much less than it was earlier in the year. So maybe Keenan's age is a problem that's factoring in at this point. They only gave him like 1 or 2 catches last week just to crack the record and have the most receptions all time among all Chargers players. That was a important moment for him, but otherwise he was not involved in the offense at all. It took late into the 4th quarter for him to get that reception to break the record. So Keenan, I think, is a bit unsafe at the moment. I actually think Quentin Johnston has higher upside right now, but to pretend like this matchup is bad would be a lie. So both players get an upgrade. I think QJ and Keenan are pretty interesting as flex options in the lineup, but Keenan has been a little lackluster lately. I actually think I'm going to be ranking Quentin Johnston like 1 spot higher than Keenan, but they'll be back to back. They'll both have value. I would flex both QJ and Keenan. They'll be more valuable if Oronde Gadsden doesn't play, but Parker Washington looks like he's still the most valuable Jags receiver, but this Chargers matchup is no joke. It's bottom 2 this year, so not a safe play, just a volume bet for a floor production with Parker Washington. I'd rather go Parker, though, than Jacoby Myers. I think Myers is still involved. However, he's kind of dependent on Brian Thomas not playing. And right now, I don't know what the status is on BTJ. So I'd probably flex both Myers and Parker Washington if BTJ is inactive, but my preference is definitely Parker Washington. More volume, more dynamic playmaker. That special teams punt return touchdown last week definitely did help you in fantasy. So hope you held on to him. I think he'll be an interesting pickup off the wire this week, and I'd rather go with him than Jacoby Myers. But if you tell me that Brian Thomas Jr. is active, I definitely start him with more confidence. I'd probably consider him a must start, at least just as valuable as guys like QJ and Keenan, if not more. So Brian Thomas Jr. would be worth a start in the flex if he does play, but this matchup is bad. I don't think he's a lock in the top 20 in the rankings, and there's also a chance that he doesn't play at all, given his pec injury. I think he's dealing with a shoulder or pec injury right now. Maybe it's an ankle. It might be a low-grade high ankle sprain. Yeah, that's what it is. BTJ, very banged up overall. So I don't think he'll play. If he does, he's not the safest bet to even finish the game, and the matchup's downgrade. I don't think BTJ is the safest start, but probably still worth a flex play at the very least. But I don't trust Trevor Lawrence. The matchup is bottom 5 for him this week, so definitely a player I am benching. Odds are he's just a floor play in general. There's not elite upside with Trevor Lawrence most weeks. But this week, it looks like Brenton Strange might be coming back to the lineup, but not a good spot for him. The Chargers rank as a bottom 10 matchup. So given we haven't seen him for a while, I don't know how healthy he'll be. I don't know how much volume he'll get. The injuries at receiver definitely help him, but until we know what we're getting, I would like to see it before I endorse it. Tight end is kind of deep, so I doubt Strange will be ranking high enough for me to tell you to start him or even stream him at the position. I don't think he'll be cracking my top 15, maybe not even inside my top 20. So let's pump the brakes with Strange. He could have value down the stretch, but this week I'd like to see it in a bad matchup. I'll be benching Brenton Strange. I'm also going to bench De'Ami Brown with the trade of Jacoby Myers. I don't trust De'Ami at all in the lineup. And then Jarrett Patterson does factor in a little bit behind Kimani Vidal, but not enough to have any fancy value. So definitely keep him on the waiver wire. Trey Harris does not get enough targets to factor in whatsoever. So not considering him a value at all. He'll get like 1 or 2 targets, but behind QJ, he's still well buried in the depth chart. But the Jags defense has been terrible lately. They got kind of lucky with turnovers. They have a decent run defense, and occasionally they do rush the passer pretty well. But I don't think that the injuries to the Chargers offensive line will be enough of an upgrade here. Justin Herbert going to light them up. They pretty much gave up 30 points to the Raiders and Texans last 2 games. The Chargers have a much better offense. The Jags are potentially giving you a negative in fantasy. I think you're asking to lose if you start the Jaguars on defense. So no thank you with them, but if there's any position that could be valuable this week against the Chargers, it's running back. At times you can run on LA, and sometimes Baishal Tutin does vulture ETN for touchdowns. So he's my long shot candidate. I'm not trying to start him whatsoever, but he is someone you should roster as a handcuff and could score a touchdown, could have some high-end production if he gives you a house call against the Chargers. It is possible. Sometimes you can't score a touchdown untouched against LA. But my long shot for the Chargers is Tyler Conklin. And if Oronde Gadsden is active, no fucking chance you're considering Tyler Conklin. But this matchup ranks top 2 for tight ends. And at the moment, I don't know for sure if Gadsden will play. He has a quad contusion, and there's a chance that he may not be active in this matchup. He did exit early last week. So there is value in the Chargers passing game, and this matchup indicates a lot of that will go to tight end. If Gadsden is out, then Conklin could be the flyer at tight end that is worth streaming, but probably not worth it unless it's DFS. I might make a player projection on Tyler Conklin recommendation this week, but otherwise I'm probably keeping him on the waiver wire. I do not trust Conklin enough. If it's not Gadsden, I'm not starting a Chargers tight end. The next matchup is Houston at Tennessee, and generally speaking, these offenses are really low upside. There are very few playmakers you actually trust. So if you look at the matchup stats, Houston is deadly across the board, a terrible matchup, bottom 5 for quarterbacks, receivers, and tight ends, and then still bottom 12 for running backs. The Titans offense is also one of the worst in the NFL, so the Texans are probably my number 1 defense this week obviously a must start. They're one of the best defenses in the league, and this is one of the best matchups you can find. So in fantasy, the Texans are a must start, probably the highest upside and floor combo you can find in week 11. And regardless of quarterback, Nico Collins is producing. So this Titans secondary is pretty bad. They've made some trades and some pieces have gotten hurt. I think Nico Collins is going to dominate against Tennessee. So he should have another good game as long as he stays healthy. He's a lock in the lineup, always a top 10 receiver. No doubt about it. You're starting Nico Collins. But if you look at this matchup for Woody Marks, if the Titans are vulnerable for anyone, it is especially vulnerable for opposing running backs. So Tennessee ranks as the second best matchup on the season. If you look at the last month, it's down to number 10, but still really good numbers across the board for opposing running backs. So they've given up a shit ton of touchdowns. I think a Texans running back is going to score a touchdown this week. And unless he's vultured by Nick Chubb, I think Woody Marks is going to be a safe start in this matchup. I like this spot a lot for running backs. A definite upgrade against the Titans. I would expect Woody Marks to find the end zone. So he's a good start this week. Maybe he won't crack the top 20, but he's definitely in the top 25. A big upgrade in this matchup for Woody Marks. But CJ Stroud, I also am giving an upgrade to. As long as he clears the concussion protocol and is active this week, the matchup is top 12. So with Daniel Jones on bye, maybe you need a replacement. I also have some rough matchups for some other good starting quarterbacks. I think CJ Stroud is at least in the super flex conversation with some legit upside. We've seen some high-end quarterback fantasy points in Houston for like 3 of the last 4 weeks. CJ Stroud has some value in this matchup, a good spot for him, and Nico should play well. So I like Stroud as a streamer this week, a good option in Superflex, and generally the last month or so, Dalton Schultz has been a very good option in fantasy football. So this matchup is not a downgrade, not a worrisome one at all. The Titans rank number 19, so not a big upgrade, but based on volume for Schultz, he feels like a good flex-worthy tight end, a good streaming option, a very legit backup in Houston. There aren't that many other targets to really threaten him. So I like Schultz from a floor standpoint, kind of bust-proof these days. But at running back, I think Tyjae Spears is really valuable in Tennessee as well. I think he could be the player that emerges as the season goes on. You know that the Titans are not competing for anything. Their season is essentially over. And why not give the young guy a chance to emerge as the workhorse? But they still pay Tony Pollard quite a bit. He's still a relevant factor. He's not going to disappear. But in terms of upside, I just don't see it with Tony Pollard. He doesn't have much burst. He doesn't catch that many passes. And he's just not that effective on the goal line. I kind of feel like Tyjae is a better runner than he is. So that's where my preference is. I would rather bench Pollard straight up. Between the two, I prefer Tyjae Spears between him and Pollard. However, I don't think either is completely overtaking the other one, and the split at worst is going to be 55-45 between the two of them. So they'll be evenly split in this offense. My preference is Tyjae, but Tony Pollard's right behind him. I'm probably ranking them back to back in the flex conversation. The Texans matchup isn't good, but if any matchup against Houston is somewhat vulnerable, it's running backs who don't get the toughest spot you could ask for. So Pollard, going to be annoying. Tyjae, I think, is the guy you want in this backfield, but only some upside if he scores a touchdown. Otherwise, the volume is a bit limited. But it's not like the Texans offense is that much of a juggernaut. The Titans defense could somehow wake up off the bye. It's possible they step up. In division at home, games are sometimes pretty strange. And the last time they played Houston, up until the fourth quarter, the score was like 6-0. It's not like Houston was playing lights out until the end of the game when Tennessee just coughed it up. They gave up 20 points in the fourth quarter. So if they could just get their shit together, they might have some level of value. I think their floor isn't terrible this week because the Texans offense isn't that impressive. But in general, I'm always embarrassed to start someone I put in this corner here. So in general, no thank you with the Titans defense. But in division, it's possible they do have some value in fantasy. I've seen nothing from Cam Ward, and this matchup is the toughest on the year. So definitely not starting Cam Ward. No fucking chance I'm starting him. I also don't like this matchup for Chico Okonkwo. So even though he gets decent volume sometimes, a bottom 5 matchup, not going to upgrade him. I would not expect a touchdown at all for this offense in Tennessee. So no thanks with Chig, definitely not starting him, but Chimeri DK is the most valuable backup receiver. However, if Ridley plays, I'm not going to start him at all. Even against Houston, though, if Ridley isn't active, no fucking chance. I would assume he gets a very difficult matchup against Derek Stingley. So no chance I'm starting him or Elik Ayamanor. Terrible matchup, bottom 3 numbers against Houston. No chance with him. And then Van Jefferson is the least productive of the 3. No effing chance with Van Jefferson. But Christian Kirk, I don't think is safe. I don't think is worth it. He's a slot receiver, and it's pretty random when he gets the ball. He has had some good target games at times, but it's never turned into anything. I don't see the upside with Christian Kirk. So no thanks with him, but honestly, I kind of want to put Nick Chubb in the long shot category, because if you told me the Titans give up multiple rushing touchdowns, I could see Nick Chubb score one of them. And this Titans running back matchup is really good. So I like Nick Chubb with a little bit of upside, but in general, the volume is pretty low. And I do think he's lost the job to Woody Marks. So I'm only going to upgrade Woody Marks. I don't think I'm willing to tell you to start multiple Houston running backs, but I could maybe rank Chubb closer to the flex rankings this week. The matchup is good enough where maybe you'll get a touchdown, but not going to bet on it. I just don't trust Chubb enough. I think he's washed at this stage of his career. He is definitely behind Woody Marks, but Xavier Hutchinson does factor in a little bit, but not enough. Not going to start him. If I'm going to take a long shot on Houston, it would be Jaden Higgins. He was one of my favorite players to draft in the 8th round of Underdog during the summer. I drafted him like crazy, and he has not lived up to expectation, but last week he did play well in that Jaguars matchup with Davis Mills. That was a really good matchup as well. This week, it's also elite against Tennessee. It ranks top 4. So if I am going to give you a dark horse, let it be the rookie I think actually has some legit upside and potential league winning value down the stretch. I'm not going to recommend Nick Chubb when Higgins has equally as good of a matchup and has more path to playing time and volume on the field. So I like Higgins with some upside, but feels way too risky. Just one game is not enough to trust him, but last week was encouraging. And then my long shot candidate for the Titans would be Calvin Ridley, who I still think is the guy you want in this offense. If he's the starter, then he's the most valuable receiver in Tennessee, but I just don't expect him to play. I don't think he'll be active. He's been banged up with a hamstring injury for a month now, and I just don't see him being active whatsoever. So not worth it in my opinion. Don't think he'll start. Even if he does, he'll go against Derek Stingley, and a terrible matchup is not worth your time. So not worth it. Just a long shot to even suit up. I would not start Ridley if active. In the Steelers-Bengals rematch, this game was a shootout first time around. The final score was like 31-30, and I could see something very similar, because if you look at these matchup stats, everything is good except running backs facing Pittsburgh. That's the only downgrade, and it's not even that difficult. It only ranks bottom 10. That's not the worst you could find. So otherwise, it's an elite spot for pretty much every Steeler facing Cincinnati. Top 2 for Aaron Rodgers. Best matchup possible for Jalen Warren and Kenny Gainwell. Also the best matchup for Jonnu Smith and Pat Freiermuth. It is also pretty solid and good for DK Metcalf. But the Steelers are no joke either. Really bad on defense this year. Top 7 matchup for Flacco. Top 3 for Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And then also top 3 for Noah Fant. So feels like you want to start everyone in this matchup. There's really no downgrade I can mention whatsoever. So in that case, we're not going to overthink it. We're obviously starting Jamar Chase. He's a lock in the lineup every week. He'll be a top 3 receiver in my rankings. And then T. Higgins has been a little up and down at times, but with Flacco, he's been lights out. I think a touchdown is kind of guaranteed for T. Higgins. He should play very well. Steelers secondary is pretty terrible, so definitely upgrade T. Higgins. I would be starting him. And then the DK Metcalf logic to start him is pretty solid as well. I can't downgrade him, and I do think Rodgers is going to play pretty well in this matchup. So Bengals off a bye. I don't trust their defense at all. Definitely start DK Metcalf. But if there's ever a matchup to upgrade Jalen Warren, it's definitely this one. The Bengals, they can't stop the running back. But I'm definitely starting Jalen Warren if I have him. He should play very, very well against Cincinnati. They can't stop any running back they have ever faced. So start them, but Joe Flacco definitely in the high-end streaming conversation. I don't think I can ever rank him top 10. It just feels a little bit too risky given his age. I just can't quite go there. But last time he played them, he had a great game, had like 3 touchdown passes, and it could definitely happen again with like over 300 yards. That's kind of been the baseline. He might retire at any point. He might get yanked for Joe Burrow at any time. So with a short runway, he has no hesitation. He is slinging it down the field as much as possible. So Flacco, very high upside, definitely worth a streaming start this week. A top 7 matchup against Pittsburgh. No concern whatsoever. But we thought it was a good matchup 2 weeks ago for Daniel Jones, and he had 5 turnovers in that game. So Pittsburgh defense at home probably plays much better than they did on Thursday several weeks ago. I could see this be a bit of a trap game for Joe Flacco. There might be several turnovers that we're just not expecting because the Steelers have woken up on defense at times, especially in division. This game means a lot. I could see it be a rough game for Joe Flacco. So if those turnovers do happen, that is the only reason I have the Steelers in the streaming conversation. I do fear the Bengals offense a lot. So in general, I'd rather bench the Steelers defense, but they have gotten a lot of turnovers at times. Like they also forced 5 turnovers on the Patriots offense. There have been some good fantasy games from Pittsburgh. Maybe this is one of them at home against Cincinnati, but odds are they burn you. Odds are Flacco does go off. So I'd rather stream Flacco if I was streaming Flacco versus the Steelers defense. Give me the quarterback over the Steelers defense. But I also think Aaron Rodgers has a very high upside in this game. So I do think he's also a flex play with upside. Last time he played them, he had 4 touchdowns, all to the tight end position. So I don't expect an interception. Rodgers never throws for like over 250, so the upside's a bit capped. But if he told me he has another 4 touchdown game, I wouldn't be that shocked. He is definitely a top 20 quarterback, definitely a streaming option in a good matchup like this in week 11. So not the worst option. You could do much, much worse than Aaron Rodgers, but Chase Brown played really well last time he faced off against Pittsburgh. Well, the matchup is bottom 10 and it didn't factor in last week against Kimani Vidal. So I would expect Chase Brown to continue his high upside, high production as of late. It started with that Steelers game. Ever since then, he's been pretty good. I would still probably flex Chase Brown at the very least, but odds are I'll start him. I think I should put him in the start category, not flex. I think I should move him. So let's do that right now. I'm officially telling you start Chase Brown in week 11. I think he will be worth your time. I'm not afraid of the Pittsburgh matchup enough to bench Chase Brown, but maybe closer to the flex rankings. Maybe not exactly a lock in the top 20. The matchup is bottom 10 against Pittsburgh, but the Steelers cannot stop tight ends. So last time Noah Fant played them, he also had a touchdown, also had 40 yards. I think he's also in the flex conversation, a legit streaming option. Every tight end against Pittsburgh has some upside, so could work out for him again. But in general, the Bengals matchup is where it's at. The Bengals are really the biggest upgrade for tight ends. So last time Pat Freiermuth went off, he was unguardable, had 2 touchdowns. One of them was like a 60-yarder. I think there's higher upside for Pat Freiermuth. As of late, he's been getting a little bit more volume than Jonnu Smith, and when he does get targeted, it's further down the field. You pick up more yardage per catch with Freiermuth as opposed to Jonnu Smith. So I like him more than Jonnu. I think he'll be in the flex rankings as well, but I do think Jonnu is also going to factor in because the Bengals are just so vulnerable against the position. They've given up like almost 14, 15 touchdowns to tight ends this year, and 4 of them in that Steelers matchup first time around this year. So Jonnu scored that first touchdown. Freiermuth scored twice. Even Darnell Washington scored a touchdown against the Bengals. The tight end position should go off in this game like it did the first time. So Jonnu interesting at flex, but kind of hard to fully trust. It's just the matchup. I'd rather go Freiermuth if I was starting a Steelers tight end. But Kenny Gainwell gets a really good matchup here against Cincinnati, so there's a chance I'd want to start him. But the reason I didn't put him in the flex conversation is because my long shot is the other running back in Pittsburgh. Caleb Johnson did factor in last week against the Chargers. And if the Bengals are such a good matchup, if they want this 3rd round pick to pan out, why not get his confidence up? I don't understand why they wouldn't give Caleb Johnson a chance to redeem himself. he's more valuable long-term than Kenny Gainwell. So my long shot for those reasons is Caleb Johnson in Pittsburgh. I think this matchup is just so good. There is some upside there. But if you told me Kenny Gainwell was a better worth your while start, wouldn't be shocked at all. He does probably have a quicker path for touches, but I want this long shot to be a real long shot, and Caleb Johnson would be kind of more impressive if you started in DFS and did have a good game. That would probably be less rostered of a player than anyone else. So Caleb Johnson is my DFS long shot. Andre Yoshivas is my Bengals long shot. And Yoshi does catch like a deep shot usually most weeks, so there is a chance it turns into a house call. Without it, though, you'll get burned. So I don't think I want either of them. I'd rather go Yoshi, but Caleb Johnson is kind of interesting. His talent, I think, will be on display at some point, but this matchup is kind of the only opportunity to maybe take that gamble. Otherwise, though, I'm not starting Roman Wilson or Calvin Austin. Austin is kind of a more interesting deep threat, but last week Roman Wilson scored a touchdown, so it's been flip-flopping between the two. I don't want to press my luck. I don't like this matchup too much. Not a big enough upgrade. It's much more interesting for someone like Darnell Washington or the tight end position. So I'd go with Freiermuth, not Roman Wilson, not Calvin Austin, and not Darnell Washington. I would bench all those depth pieces in Pittsburgh. But the Steelers offense should play well. The Bengals defense is hot garbage. So there is no circumstance where I'm ever considering to start the Bengals defense. No way in hell would I start them. Samaje Perine not getting enough volume either, so definitely bench Samaje Perine. Those are the start sits for the Bengals at the Steelers. The Giants are hosting Green Bay, and it does not look like Jackson Dart will be eligible. It's possible he clears the concussion protocol, but I'm assuming he's inactive this week. Most quarterbacks and all players really miss at least one game, if not two, from a concussion these days. So they're not going to take any chances. I do not think Jackson Dart will get the start. So not going to start him. Definitely not starting Russell Wilson. The Packers are a bottom 10 matchup. So the Giants offense going to look like shit. I do not trust any Giant in my starting lineup. So that's why I'm only starting the Packers in this one. Josh Jacobs is always a lock in the lineup. He's been a little banged up lately, but this matchup against the Giants ranks top 3, and a touchdown is a guarantee with Jacobs every week. So he's a lock. Definitely start him. But this matchup for Jordan Love ranks top 6. Caleb Williams torched them last week, but a lot of that also came in the run game, but weather was a problem. Weather, I don't think is going to be as big of a deal, but it will be relevant. There is a 40% chance of rain in this matchup, but wind's not a big problem. Rain is not going to completely impact the passing game that much. I still think Love will be throwing it as usual. Just because it's raining, I don't think it'll completely derail that game script. So he should be fine. The matchup is a good one, so I would consider Jordan Love a clear top 12 quarterback at the worst this week. When he has a good game, it's really good. So against bad teams, he usually steps up. I feel like a bounce back is due for him, and I think he plays well on the road at the Giants. I would expect Green Bay to win this game, and I do think Love has some upside. But without Tucker Kraft, his floor does go down, and same with the ceiling. He's not the same player without his best weapon, Tucker Kraft. But the Packers defense looked really good, held the Eagles to just 10 points last week. So against the Giants and Russell Wilson, they should be a safe start. I'm definitely starting Green Bay against the Giants with rain factoring in. That should help them a little bit, but they've been a safe start in general. They usually get you at least like 8-9 points as a fantasy defense. So hoping for a turnover against Russell Wilson, it should probably happen. But it looks like Romeo Doubs might be banged up this week. So Christian Watson, I think, will be the safest bet at receiver in Green Bay. The matchup is top 10. The Giants secondary does not scare you whatsoever. And Watson has been targeted down the field a decent amount. So last week he had the most receiving yards of any Green Bay Packer. I would assume that repeats because Romeo Doubs is a question mark. I think Watson is the safest play at receiver there. This matchup should indicate you want to start at least one Green Bay receiver. So Watson would be my pick. However, I could see him as more of a flex play than a clear start. But Romeo Doubs would be a much better play if he wasn't banged up, but he's questionable. He may not suit up. He did exit last week, and Dontavian Wicks did fill in for him. So if Romeo Doubs is active, then I would definitely start him, but I don't know for sure if he'll suit up. So he's just in this little hesitation zone. I'm not quite sure he'll even play. If he doesn't, then Dontavian Wicks played pretty well without him last week. Wicks looked okay. He would be an interesting flex play in a good matchup against the Giants. But maybe you're worried about the weather. I wouldn't care too much about it. Luke Musgrave, though, did get a lot of reps and routes run in the Packers offense last week. He is contributing a decent amount for Tucker Kraft. So as expected, he has value, but not safe enough to start yet. Just a handcuff tight end, a backup flex play. And then for the Giants, I don't really want to trust them. The matchup against Green Bay could be tricky, but against receivers, it hasn't been that difficult on the season. Just the 21st most fantasy points allowed. So Wanda Robinson should be okay. With Russell Wilson, he does have his best game of the year. That Cowboys game, he did go off. So maybe Russell Wilson would chuck it down the field, but in general, Wan'Dale's just a volume option for a floor of like 8-9 points. I think he's worth a flex play at the very least. Even with a backup quarterback, I still think Wan'Dale gets good enough volume to trust. But the Packers matchup for Theo Johnson is solid, top 12 at the position. So Theo Johnson not going to go anywhere, still a heavily targeted option in New York. So in a good matchup, definitely a flex option. Maybe not top 10 at tight end, but could score a touchdown again. Does have some upside. But otherwise, I'm benching every player. Without Jackson Dart, I do not trust the upside with Russell Wilson. So even in a solid matchup for Darius Slayton, I will bench him. Not going to trust Russell Wilson. And then Matthew Golden is not a safe bet to play. He was inactive last week. So even if Romeo Doubs doesn't start, I don't know if Golden will suit up. I would just bench him. This rainy matchup doesn't feel like the spot to trust him. So I'd rather go Christian Watson. I'd rather go Dontavian Wicks. I'd still rather go Luke Musgrave than Matthew Golden. But I don't trust the backup running back behind Josh Jacobs. Jacobs is healthy now, and there's really no room for upside here. So no thank you with Emmanuel Wilson. But this matchup for Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary is terrible. It's a big time slip between Singletary and Tracy. So my preference is still Tracy, but not by much. Singletary had yet another game with like more yardage than him. And this Packers matchup is bottom 5. So no thanks with either of them. Not enough volume to trust. I'd bench both Tyrone Tracy and Devin Singletary. Not going to be ranked inside my top 30 at the position. Not even worth a flex play in my opinion. But Daniel Bellinger, not worth it either. The matchup is interesting for Theo Johnson, but with Russell Wilson, not going to trust a backup tight end. And then like I mentioned, Jackson Dart, I don't think will play. Russell Wilson, I'm not going to start at all in fantasy. But my long shot for this game, given the weather, would be the Giants defense. It's not like the Packers defense has been impressive. They've lost 3 games where their opponent has scored less than 17 points. Last week, they dropped only 7 against Philadelphia. So I don't trust Jordan Love with no Tucker Kraft. Some of the upside in this offense is just missing. And even though Jacobs probably plays well, the Giants defense has kept some games interesting at times this year. So probably not going to start him. It feels a little too risky, but they are my long shot candidate. If you told me they put up top 10 numbers this week, wouldn't be that shocked with the Giants defense, but feels pretty scary to actually trust him. I don't think I'm going to do it. And then there is a chance that Jaden Reed does return to the lineup this week. I don't think it'll happen. It looks like he won't come back until week 13 at the soonest, but this is week 11. There's a chance that he returns. I've read some reports. I actually picked up Jaden Reed in the subscriber league so that I have some depth on my roster, but from the reports I've read, he is now only recovering from the collarbone. His foot has fully healed. He had successful surgery on it, and that was the more concerning injury. The foot was a bigger problem than the collarbone. If the collarbone heals, he can slot right in. That's not going to limit him at all. But if the foot isn't fully healed, Jaden Reed not going to be the same player. So when Reed comes back, he will have upside with Kraft injured. Now Romeo Doubs banged up. Reed might be the number 1 receiver in Green Bay. I would consider him the highest value receiver once he comes back. So not expecting it this week, but it is possible. I doubt it. But when he does come back, he will be a legit start in fantasy. So my long shot for Green Bay is Jaden Reed. He is still not healthy, but probably will be in 2 weeks. So that's it for part 1 of this video. It went quite long. So if you're interested in all of the late afternoon and Sunday night, Monday night games, that's going to be available in part 2. And as soon as that's ready, I will post it on the channel. So look out for that. My name's Adam Riancho. If you enjoyed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. But I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.